Today we speak to Dr. Alessandro Arduino, the co-director of the Security and Crisis Management Program at the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences. Alessandro's 2 decades of experience in China encompasses security analysis and crisis management. His main research interests include Chinese political economy, the Sino-Central Asia relations, sovereign wealth funds, private military and security corporations, and China's security and foreign policy. We speak about the history of private military companies, private security companies in the West. Will there be a Wagner-style Chinese private military company? Will there be a Chinese-style Blackwater company that emerges? We talk about this and more. Hope you enjoy the episode. Thank you so much. Alessandro Arduino, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on was to discuss some of your previous work and some of the articles that I've seen published in a variety of places covering Chinese private military companies. I'm happy for you to maybe give a brief introduction of yourself and some of your work, and maybe that will lead us into a lengthier, more detailed conversation about private military companies, but specifically the Chinese angle.
First of all, thank you very much for your invitation to be with you on your podcast, Exit Strategy.
Thank you.
I've been researching in Chinese private security companies for quite a long time, mostly say since the inception of the Chinese private security going abroad. In my personal opinion, it's quite an interesting phenomenon to take a look at, but you know, that's the problem for every researcher. We all think that whatever we research is at the center of the world and the world rotates around it. And that's the case for me and Chinese private security firm. When I was based in China, I've been in China for more than 20 years. I started to look at the Belt and Road in 2013, but even before the Belt and Road, at Chinese companies going abroad, investing abroad, the so-called Go West that Professor Wang Jis from Beida was writing about. Later on, I was still looking at state-owned enterprises, but then I witnessed an increase of violence against Chinese corporation and Chinese citizens abroad, not only due to the fact that there was a perception of, let's say, animosity against China or citizen, but just because they were investing in very volatile and high-risk areas. So I had the question in my mind, and it was a time when it was quite usual on the media to read about private military company, especially Blackwater. It was a time of Iraq, beginning of increase of privatization of the Afghan conflict. And then I just had a very simple question on my mind. And is China going to have a Blackwater? And at the beginning, when I was looking at the usual suspect, think tank in China and so on, the answer was no. But later on, I realized that just asking at state-owned enterprises oil firm, that it was already a reality. There were private security firms going abroad looking at protecting Chinese investment. And later on, I still went on doing this kind of research. And even now that I moved from China to Singapore, I'm based at the National University of Singapore Middle East Institute. I still devote an important part of my research on private military, private security, mercenaries, and drones.
Yeah, it's fascinating work. I myself did academic research in private military companies during the War on Terror, so I'm up to speed on much of this, but I don't know that many of my listeners are. So let's set the stage and kind of give a brief history of private military companies, and push back if you think anything I'm saying may be not completely accurate, because it has been some time since I've left the academy. I know private military companies, as people probably in the West understand them, they understand them through the South African beginnings, right? So in the 90s, the Executive Outcomes, the Sandline International, these are fascinating stories, fascinating companies, it almost seems conspiratorial, but it's actually, or something that's out of a movie. But if anyone does any background research, just look up Executive Outcomes or Sandline International. That story alone is just, that could be a multi-part podcast in and of itself. That sort of expanded into their use abroad elsewhere, and particularly in the United States, the private military company became a more corporate entity that was given permission to operate on behalf of the state. They'd have to bid for contracts, for example. So these are the companies that we're used to seeing, or we're used to hearing about during the War on Terror: Blackwater, DynCorp, Triple Canopy, a variety. There's a litany of them, large and small. And now we're starting to see, after the War on Terror, you didn't really hear too much about these companies, and now we're starting to see more and more in international news about Wagner Group, Russia's private military company that is operating throughout the Middle East, Syria, also parts of Africa, Central African Republic, and now the Chinese private military company. Now, this is striking because China is an authoritarian, holds control over its economy. It's not exactly, it doesn't behave the way the United States behaves in terms of having these companies bid for operations abroad. China is a different animal, right? So what is the Chinese private military company? And is my history correct there? I mean, is that a good way to understand the sort of evolution of these companies?
No, definitely. As you mentioned, starting to look at Africa, it's quite interesting because if we just look at the time that you were mentioning, from the 60s to the 90s,
right,
the role of mercenaries / private military company was quite essential in keeping some kind of government into power, in enabling in some respect violence, or in the other side, if we look at the different angle, in providing a cost-effective solution for even protecting a humanitarian issue. Having said that, it's still all quite marred in a gray area. There are several legal limbo that mix mercenary, private military, and private security company. But if you want to try to make it simple, we can just say that mercenary is someone that go to fight for money in a country in which his own country is not at war with. United Nations is quite straightforward on this definition. Then if we move to private military company, and are the company that enable a country military effort in another country, like for example, during Iraq, the percentage of contractors compared to the deployed men on the ground were more than 1-to-1. In the previous war were 0 point something, but then starting with the former Yugoslavia conflict, moving to Iraq, and then at the top with Afghanistan, we have more than almost 1.5 contractor for each military soldier deployed in land. Having said that, normally when we talk about contractor, the first thing that comes into our mind is someone with a Kalashnikov protecting a guarded compound. That's not the case. It's just a very short percentage of these contractors. Most of them are people that support basic construction, that just cook the meals, that deliver the mail, even hairdresser. They are part of all this effort. And especially now with the dwindling effort in Afghanistan and in Iraq, there will be a lot of people, especially TNC, third national contractors, that are going to be unemployed, and they are looking at the next war, what is going to be next in a privatization of the monopoly of violence. And then the third one is private security. Is a company that is engaged in protecting some asset or some personnel. You have close security protection that is more known as bodyguard, and then you move to the basic, someone that is looking at the gate, at the warehouse, and protect it against criminal, theft, vandalism, and so on. So in my personal opinion, of course, there are a lot of gray area, because if you have a company that is labeled private security, and then they do training, or from training, they just do repair for drones and so on, but then they augment a country capacity in warfare, and therefore where you draw the line is PSC, is PMC, and so on. Or if a PMC start to have a, let's say, proactive attitude, and then they strike first, they don't strike after, then again, are we talking about private military, or we even go on the border on mercenary. And that's the case of Wagner Group, for example.
Right, right. So we're talking, so I guess, yeah, we're talking tip of the sphere, as they say in military jargon. These are offensive operations, or even, I guess, armed security professionals that are not protecting necessarily diplomats or wealthy individuals or other patrons, but we're talking about a militarized group that are specifically deployed for a variety of state interests abroad, right? How should we look? What's the difference between everything we just talked about and this new phenomenon, the Chinese private military company?
Yeah, on the Chinese, I would like to say they are more on the side of private security.
Okay.
First and foremost, for two main reasons, and then we can look at different angles. First, they are a latecomer in the market for force, in the privatization market force. Well, you mentioned it in the 60s, Anglo-Saxon company were already inland in Africa. Then there were companies from South Africa, like Executive UCAM, Sandline in Papua New Guinea. And then they evolved in something more complex that can be DynCorp, Contraries, Triple Canopy, and G4S, and so on. The Chinese are a latecomer. China started in 2013 to go massively abroad with the Belt and Road, and they start follow the Chinese company. So basically, it's just follow your client. They were already client in China. This company internationalized it, and their security firm went with them. Second, by Chinese law, they are not able to use weapons. It's very difficult in mainland China to acquire a license, even for this company, for any kind of non-automatic weapon. And just few of these companies, even going abroad, legally have the chance to have this license. So what an unarmed private security can do, basically, is rely on local militia, local police force or army rented just for that specific topic, or working with foreign company that provide this kind of service, doing joint venture. The Chinese company are evolving quite fast. I had on-field, in-field research a couple of years ago was the last one when I was based in Africa. And I wrote extensively on Chinese private security firm in Africa. And at the time I was seeing that their technique, training, and quality was evolving pretty fast. But again, let me say, there are just a few companies in China that can operate independently abroad. And there are more than 5,000/8,000 companies in mainland China with more than 3 million security officers that work in China. But we are talking about the guard at the gate, the guy in Starbucks looking just at the floor of the people, and so on. So there is a huge gap between the offer from the Western private military firm. Russia, it's another ball game. We have not only to look at Wagner Group, that still I feel it difficult to define it just a private military. Is an extension of the state in terms of hybrid warfare, but there are other Russian companies like Slavonica, Mora, and so on that provide service. And of course, when you have veterans from wars that are trained into combat, and in China it's not the case. They have mostly policemen and soldiers, but none of them has been never at war. They are not veterans. So even this experience, with the exception of Blue Helmet, is quite important for China too.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So just to be clear, is there any kind of militarized private Chinese private military company that's existing now? I'm not sure. I mean,
at the moment, as I mentioned before, I always like to label it as private security firm.
Sure. Okay.
And that's for now. It doesn't mean that in the near future that is not going to be a pure private military. And then the question will be if China is going to face a so-called Blackwater moment.
Right.
It was a moment in Nisour Square when a contractor from Blackwater slaughtered innocent civilian, and then there was a huge repercussion on the U.S. effort to win the heart and mind in Iraq, but also for all the sector. Blackwater at the time was at the top of the media attention, but this kind of incident are quite common in some respect, unfortunately. And the problem with private military is always to try to find a solution in containing negative spillover on the local population.
Right.
that doesn't say that in the future China is not going to have private military company, but the question is first and foremost how we can call private a company in China.
Right.
And the second is what is the relation with the state and the relation with PLA or PAP, the People Liberation Army and the People Armed Police. These are the two main questions now to look at this evolution pattern.
So we could certainly speculate what that relationship will be, right? It will be essentially an armed wing of the PLA that's separate from its traditional military, and that it will probably be used to secure Chinese interests abroad, Central Asia, probably, and maybe even in parts of Afghanistan, especially now that the United States has left that country. And probably in a variety of places throughout Africa where its investments are steadily growing. I'm not sure that they'll be used in the way that Wagner Group is used, but I could be wrong here. I mean, I know I'm probably asking to speculate, but is that a correct way of, I mean, is that how we should see this? I mean,
look, definitely we have to look at two things from a Beijing perspective. First is willingness, and second is capabilities.
Right.
Capabilities, again, my personal opinion, are not there yet. So if there will be a pure Chinese private military, and it's easy to spot because its operators are ethnic Chinese, and something bad happen, this is going to be a very high price that the Belt and Road win-win narrative is going to pay. Willingness, again, if Beijing willing to send something that resembles the PLA in disguise, there has been some call, especially now regarding the US withdrawal from Afghanistan and the vacuum of power that is going to create on a daily basis. And we don't have to forget that China shares a very tiny border with Afghanistan. In the Wakhan corridor, a little bit more than 50 kilometers. But the problem is the 1,000-kilometer border that Afghanistan have with Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, and also the relationship with China and Central Asia. Having said that, I've been reading several articles being written by serious scholar and academician in these days, looking at Chinese private security companies / new private military company going there. There are some companies, or there were in Kabul, protecting hotel where Chinese workers were there. I don't think that in the near short term, there will be any serious Chinese private security firm going to adventure in that area for one simple reason. And that's the reason that I basically discovered, but is a very not well hidden secret. They are private in a sense that they want to make money out of their business, their businessmen. So they are looking to go in a place where the ratio between risk and the reward is quite good. So if we look, for example, at Africa, the top group like Hai Weiwei, Huaxin Zhong'an, and so on, they look at area like Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Ghana, little bit New Guinea. But we are not looking at Somalia, for example. We are not looking at area near Sahel when there is high risk of terrorist activity. They know they are not prepared, and they know that if they get into trouble, Beijing will have some issue in coming to save them. Having said that, you cannot say they are just a pure private entity bent on making money. As I mentioned before, we are talking about the People's Republic of China. It means they work on a socialist market, or wherever you want to call it.
Sure.
So where the state ends and the private begins is already a different issue from a pure company like market company like Control Risk, for example, or G4S, that you can say that they are leading the pack in the fact that they are businessmen that provide security service. And then there is PLA in disguise. At the moment, I don't think there is this kind of possibility that cannot be discounted in the near future, of course.
Yeah.
But then they can provide very valuable intelligence for Beijing. And then they are not going to hide it, because if you look at President Xi Jinping discourse on civil military fusion, all the companies that have access to this kind of data, training, asset, and so on, have to share it with the military. So it's already on the paper.
Right.
They are going to provide intelligence that sometimes can be useful, sometimes not. But of course, they are a quite important asset that Beijing is going to use in all this area covered by the BRI, from Central Asia to the Middle East to Africa and so on. But at the same time, when I mentioned willingness, if we just look on the academia, the publication on security in Chinese language, still the first label that come in all the paper is graveyard of empire. Right. So China is not going to play the game that the Tsarist Russia played, that the Soviet Union played, and we see after 20 years that the United States played. But then we don't have to discount all the interest and let's say multiple interlinking power game that are going to be played soon. Turkey is getting there. China is extremely anxious about what's happening in Kabul. And then in this respect, some private security firm can operate in terms of more of collecting intelligence than providing Wagner style kind of service. That is something that even the Russia, they will be probably more eager to do it both under the SCO or CSTO framework.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, you mentioned Afghanistan, and it seems that Afghanistan, in the wake of American withdrawal, is presenting Beijing with a very unique opportunity. I mean, Central Asia as well, and it almost seems like a ripe ground for where PMCs would start to be being used. I know that China's party has recently met with leaders of the Taliban and have basically said, listen, we're going to have great relations as long as you don't bring up the Uyghur situation. And I think there was pretty much agreement there. Can you talk a little bit about what China's interest is in Afghanistan? And I'm wondering if in that vacuum of American absence, or sorry, in the American vacuum, if that sets the stage for something kind of what we're talking about today, more Chinese private security companies, or maybe even, and I know we're speculating here, but maybe even a Wagner style or Blackwater style company that is working on behalf of the Chinese state.
On this, I mean, we are still, as you mentioned, in a matter of speculation. So right. Let me try some wild guess. First and foremost, and it's already started a few years ago, China is providing military material for border control to some of the Central Asian countries, especially Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. There is a lot of talk, of course, on the first Chinese military base in Djibouti, but there is also another Chinese military base that is in border between Tajikistan and Afghanistan. And that's most related to training, and there is a PAP presence. Military style Blackwater/Wagner made in China in Kabul, I don't see it in the coming month or probably in the coming year. Again, things change very fast.
Sure.
But I don't see neither China throwing that kind of money for reconstruction that the Afghans are expecting.
Right.
I will say that, for example, the problem of over-expectation on Chinese investment is not only related to Afghanistan, but in area like Syria. If you look at Arab news in Syria, the news in Arabic, there is a lot of expectation in looking at China investing billions of dollars for the reconstruction, while still probably Chinese SOE look at it as a too risky environment still now in which invest money. Same. Big Chinese investment along Pakistan. Yes, we are talking about $65 billion in the CPEC, Sino-Pakistan Economic Corridor. In Afghanistan, several years ago, under the US security umbrella, there was Mes Aynak, this copper mine. There are a lot of projects in linking BRI with Afghanistan, but nothing is going to happen until there is some sort of stabilization. And there are so many players now that are eager to enter in the fray, as I mentioned, from Turkey, that probably is going to stay to defend the airport. Turkey has already started a training program for Afghan National Army Commando in Turkey. And probably China is going to supply some military equipment, but mostly for border control. So hopefully I will not be wrong seeing just Chinese private security firm armed jumping into Kabul tomorrow, but you never know, especially when you talk about Afghanistan. When you mentioned the meeting with the Taliban, my personal opinion was quite interesting because it was a win-win on Chinese side for both of them. One, what China wanted was just have a direct talk that was not just mediated by Qatar, like the one in Doha. And when they are really anxious about East Turkestan movement fighter coming back to Xinjiang. And in this respect, this anxiety needs some reassurance that probably the Taliban gave them. And at the same time, they give the Taliban the opportunity to show to the world that they are a serious force with international relations,
Right.
and they have the possibility to talk directly with the Chinese. But then we have to say, if the Taliban is a new generation of Taliban fighter, are going to follow the pattern of the former generation in racing immediately to Kabul, I doubt that. It will be more some kind of pincher movement, moving in the other province, starting from the north, where the first time they failed to have any road. And we don't have to forget that Afghanistan, there are so many local interests from returning warlord, tribal feud, and so on. And of course, economically speaking, the withdrawal of the ISAF and the US war machine in terms of money for the local population and the local business, it's quite important. And then we'll see if the opioid market and the drug smuggling still will be one of the main components of terrorism financing and for the overall financing.
Yeah, no doubt for sure. That will certainly be a very interesting development, and we'll certainly, have to keep our eyes open about the developments there. So I guess it's not safe to say that the global industry for private security is growing, since we can't exactly say that the Chinese private military industry is something that even exists, because it's a quasi speculative force that exists in only in terms of, like you said, it's not private. It's certainly not represented by any of the Western or international trade associations that umbrella the private military companies or private security companies. What else should we know about this phenomenon? What else have you found in your research about Chinese private military, Chinese private security?
On this, you are correct. They have their own association, but among the really few, let's say less than 20 of this company, who have a truly international footprint, and are not just companies that they try to make some money on some security contract out of China because they have no way to make other money now in China. Is a sector that suffer in mainland China and also outside China of several big problems. First problem is a race to the bottom. State-owned enterprises and even private company in China, they look at security like a last expense item, and they don't want to spend money out of it. Some of these companies that I've been interviewing, especially the one working in Pakistan, I've been asking them why you spend so low, or even you don't spend money on security and insurance. And their answer was very simple. They say, look, Alex, we are subcontractor. Our margin is very tiny, is extremely narrow. We know that we need serious security provider, but this is going to hit our margin. So we just cross the finger and we hope that nothing happening. Of course, this is changing. Big companies, state-owned enterprises, has a mandate from Beijing to enact all what is possible in terms of providing security for the Chinese worker that operate abroad. But then, having said that, among these company, few company only have the skill in promoting this kind of security business, and they want to be recognized by the international, the Western peers as at the same status. So they try mostly to increase the human resource capability training, but also certification. What I mean by certification, there is an association, ICOCA, which I'm observer, International Code of Conduct Association, and they look at self-regulate private security firm all over the world. So they have firms that are from Iraq, from Europe, from South America, and from China. But if we look at the huge number of Chinese companies, I talked before, it was 5,000 to 8,000, depending who you look at, there are 2 Chinese companies registered with ICOCA, and ICOCA is working well and hard in increasing the number of Chinese companies that they are going to self-regulate and to abide by the code of conduct. It means more transparency, it means less negative spillover, and it means the protection of human rights, and that's quite important.
Right. Yeah, it seems okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So I mean, are they paying into this International Trade Association? Is it hasty to say that a Chinese private security company will be able to self-regulate? And I mean, that's always been like a little bit of a strange thing to talk about, right? I mean, we even said that Blackwater was once a member of the International Peacekeeping Operations Association. And we know that self-regulation in this industry is a very fickle idea. Is it safe to say that this is sort of the same thing here with this association?
Look, that's very difficult. If we look again at pure academic paper,
right,
you see there are a lot of publications, especially in the last 10 years, that they look at the difference between law implication and non-judiciary mechanism. Mm-hmm. So this kind of association, self-regulation is non-judiciary mechanism. And it's quite important because we have to look, if we look from a pure legal standpoint, the answer is very straightforward. No, that's not going to happen. Right. But then it's what we desire and what we have, there is a huge gap. And what I mean by this, we are talking about the transnational characters of the privatization of the monopoly of war. It means that you have a company that is located in one country. Maybe it's even not from China, but is registered in the BVI in Hong Kong or whatsoever, or is a Russian company from St. Petersburg registered in Hong Kong that operated in an area, let's say Syria, where the rule of law is very difficult to get implemented. So the question is, if this company kills someone unlawfully, who is going to judge them? The local court, the international court, under which law, or the court of the country of origin? So this is extremely complex. And what the code of conduct do is to try to make accountability more practical. So for example, ICOCA have a very interesting development in the last years about the grieving mechanism. If they abide by the code and something really bad happen, like a killing of innocent bystander, then they have a grievance mechanism for the compensation of the family and and so on. So this, I see, it's putting a band-aid on a huge wound, but it's a start.
Sure.
And I say the problem is not the efficiency of the code of conduct. The problem is among 8,000 companies, we are talking about 2 Chinese companies, and they're 2 over the top, because this is a cost again. And then there are several barriers to get certified. And don't forget that most of the time, these private security firms speak only one language, their own language, Chinese. So even that language is a huge barrier. I'm not joking now. During the interview of one of these companies, smaller one, but still an important player in Shanghai, they mentioned to me that they give up teaching English to their guys, and they were trying to teach Chinese to a group of Nepalese Gurkha that they hired.
Oh
so
my
you
gosh.
see the level of complexity
wow.
just with the language. But then again, that's the reason they work well outside China, because Chinese state-owned enterprises and Chinese construction company, again, they speak Chinese. So first and foremost, language is not a barrier. And second, even for big corporation, finding a US company that is going to provide security for them, they can get some doubt to where is my information going to when this company is going back to the United States. So again, if you look as a business and you go to the website of several companies and you go to the Chinese company website, most of the time you don't even find the page in English. It's all in Chinese. And this tells you immediately the story. Their customer are Chinese company. Only few of them are updating the English website because they look to find client abroad, especially in maritime anti-piracy mission or this kind of stuff. But most of them, if you look at the Russian counterpart, even a small one, you find English, Arabic, and Chinese now. Because if US company or let's say Western company are unable or unwilling to cooperate with the Chinese, the Russians are really pushing this market because they think that BRI protection can be a good market for their company.
Is China hiring American or Western private security companies for, I guess, like their investment operations abroad? So, I mean, there was this angle where when Blackwater was punished by the Department of State years after the Nisour Square massacre, he started. You probably have to remind me because I'm hazy on a lot of the the details, but he started, I think, Frontier Services Group, which was headquartered in Shanghai. Eric Prince was doing, I think, logistic services for Chinese companies, kind of as a an insult to the United States. Kind of, it almost seemed like he did it on purpose to upset them, and while also, you know, having a great paying client. So win-win on his part. Yeah, what can you say about that? Do you know anything about this development?
Look, on that, we are talking about 2018,
right?
If I'm correct. Frontier Service Group was registered in Hong Kong
Okay.
as a joint venture between CITIC, who was one of the biggest financial conglomerate in China, and had also office in Beijing. As you mentioned correctly, it started as a logistic company. Then there was some issue in doing training for Chinese private security firm in Beijing. And then suddenly at the end of 2018, 2019, it changed on the website saying, look, we are doing also security service, looking at South Sudan, Ghana, Somalia, and so on, in matching their area logistical service with their skill. If let's say, as you said, as Eric was going to rub it into the face of the U.S. State Department,
right?
I mean, I think if we look at the role of Eric Prince all over the global sphere of private military, it's easier to say where he is not operating,
right,
than where he's operating,
yeah.
Because you see him appear in the UAE, in the Gulf project with Libya, with the European Union, and even in Ukraine. So China probably was one, as everybody was looking at the time. First, China was not enemy number one for the United States at the time. Second, yes, China was rising, but also the BRI was appealing to everybody who want to make some money abroad, because it was looking at billions of US dollars going all over the world. And that makes sense. My big question on that, and I hope in the future to ask personally to Mr. Prince, is that if he made any money out of the FSG venture. That's my big question mark. Having said that, there are other operators at the time, and then, as I mentioned, it was a time when working with China or on Chinese project was not choosing side between the United States and China. There were a lot of foreign company, Western company that open office in Shanghai, in Beijing, like Control Risk, I think they're still there, or even individual with former special forces training, especially Israeli, that were recruited to go to Beijing and to train in private security, the force there. And mostly it's important because they still have a mindset that is more related to having soldier and policemen like everywhere in the private military and private security. But the problem is when you are private security, most of the time you are alone. You work with a small team and you need to have a snap decision on the minute, something right. That is the opposite of the training of someone in the military, except the special forces, because in the military, they train you to obey the order and that's it. Don't be flexible, just obey the order that is given to you. So that's one of the problems for the Chinese PSC going abroad. Of course, with the language one is one that I mentioned before. On this Western company from UK, from US, from Israel were there. Even the association in the United States were looking at have more interaction with China. But then, especially with the Trump administration, we see this seizure, this cut between China and the United States. And then I sincerely doubt that any company who want to still have some business in the West or with the West is going to side. But this give an ample chance to players like the Russian, as I mentioned before. And the Russian have just two selling points to the Chinese. First, we are not from the West in terms sided with the US, so they protect the privacy, the data, and the business secret strategy of a company. And second, they are cheaper. It costs way less than a Western counterpart, and at the same time they always underline the fact that their operators are battlefield tested. But then again, if you have something really blunt instrument like the Russian private military, this is going to benefit a win-win narrative that Beijing want to share with all of the world and still have on Beijing propaganda. So having someone that is going to act reckless, it can be more a damage for Beijing than a solution for the problem.
Right. Yeah, certainly interesting topic. Is there anything else that we should know about Chinese private military companies or the security industry that's growing? I guess my last question beyond that would be, if we see a Chinese company emerge into a sort of Blackwater or a sort of Russian Wagner group, how will we find out about it? Because usually something really bad has to happen before it actually comes out that something like this exists. Because I imagine we're not going to very easily see the evolution of what we're talking about now from a company into, this sort of Blackwater sort of scenario. Something usually has to go wrong in the jungles of Africa before we're like, oh, this is happening now. Which is how I found out about Wagner Group, and I think most journalists and academics. But yeah, I mean, do you think is that an accurate statement? And then I guess just leave us on anything else you think we should know and consider when we're talking about Chinese private security and military companies.
More than give you a wild guess about the evolution, I have 2 points. First point is hope. Hope that we still are in time to increase the number of Chinese private security firms that are going to abide to international code of conduct. And in this respect, they will increase accountability. So if something bad happens, you're going to know beforehand or try to mitigate it to make it not happen. Second, I think if we want to look at the direction, the best place to look at is Africa. As we started our discourse with you mentioning 60s and 90s in Africa, now Africa is a very important litmus test for Beijing Belt and Road Initiative, for the Digital Silk Road, for the Health Silk Road, but also for the private security firm. Why? Because the number is increasing, but there are a lot of different players. We have Chinese private security firm at very high level providing anti-piracy service, but at the same time, there are small militia created by Chinese miners in area like Zambia or in Ghana, and they provide some kind of security service, but most of the time they create problems, like killing of illegal miners or even setting up illegal entities. And this can create very negative spillover on the local population. So if we keep monitoring what is going on in Africa, in all this area, then we can have quite an idea what is going to happen in the next 10 years. Let me say, if the direction is still protection against vandalism and theft, and they are not going to upgrade their military skills, that's it. We are still looking about private security. But then if we see a quasi-private security moving into more complex environment, and by complex I mean very high risk like Sahel now, then it can raise some doubt. This is going to be a private military, or even if it's a PLA in disguise, because there is no business solution or efficiency in going into that area because they are not following the pattern of investment. So again, if we look at Africa with the more granular and the detailed analysis, then we can try to look at the overall Chinese private security direction. And finger crossed, as I mentioned before, I'm an incurable optimism. We are going just to witness a trend in private security. If we will have a spillover into the private military, then a Blackwater moment with Chinese characteristic can be a serious issue.
Right. It's a fascinating topic. Alessandro Arduino, thank you so much for your time today. Would you like to give us your social media or website, or where can we follow your work and keep up to task with this topic?
Look, thanks again for having me today. It's quite easy to follow me on the Middle East Institute National University of Singapore webpage when there are basically my publication, the webinar that we organize, and so on. And of course, as usual, email is the easiest way to reach me. I'm very slow to answer, but I always answer.
No worries. I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Pleasure indeed. Have a great day.
All right, you too. Thank you.